launching a new theme on Sangonite that we'll be exploring from now till the end of the year. And we've called this theme Metaphor, Magic and Mystery. So you might be asking yourself, why? Why have they chosen this title? Why have they chosen this theme? Surely Buddhism is this really irrational tradition. Many of us chose to get involved in Buddhism in the first place because it is rational. It makes sense. In my own case, I had a scientific education, but I had a deep feeling that life needed a spiritual dimension if it was going to be meaningful. But at the same time, I just couldn't believe in the traditional religions of our society, which seemed to ask me to believe things that I couldn't believe. And I think many other people have a similar response. We need to follow we feel we need to follow a spiritual path to have a meaningful life, but the traditional religions of our society seem to demand that we believe in things that we just can't. Whereas the teachings of Buddhism make sense. They can seem almost obvious. It can seem almost as though we've always known them, although we maybe weren't very conscious of it. So Buddhism is this very, very logical, rational tradition. So why this theme? Metaphor, magic and mystery, which doesn't sound particularly rational or logical. Well, I suppose one reason might be is that Sangharakshita, the founder of our order and our community, he recently published a book called Metaphor, Magic and Mystery, which might have sort of jogged our elbow. And actually, the fact that he published a book called that might be a bit surprising because Sangharakshita is very logical. He's very, very logical. He's very, very clear. And he's constantly reminding us that we need reason, that we need to think logically, that we need to think clearly. This is one of his great recurring themes. He says it over and over again. We might almost say he goes on about it. He probably goes on about it in a way that some people who don't want to hear that find quite irritating, actually. Think clearly, think for yourself. Don't just accept all the stuff that society throws at you. Don't just accept things because they're fashionable. Think. Does it make sense? Is it logical? But one of the great things about Sangharakshita is that he also constantly balances that message with another that might seem to contradict it. So that other message is that we need to be open to the power of myth, to mythic truth, the power of archetypal images, that we need to be open to the power of art and music and poetry, and all these have got something really important to do with the spiritual life. He tells us that we need to use what he calls the spiritual imagination, as well as reason, to see the truth, to perceive the truth. And that seeing the truth is more like appreciating the beauty of a work of art or a piece of music or a landscape than it is like understanding a geometrical formula or knowing understanding a geometrical proof or understanding a physical formula. He tells us that the truth is perceived as much with the heart as with the head. In fact, he tells us that we need to unify our thinking and our feeling into what he calls a new faculty, the spiritual faculty, to perceive the highest truths, the highest spiritual truths. He tells us that we need to be open to the depths of the universe, to see that there is more to reality than what we can touch and see and measure. And he tells us that we need to stir our own depths to allow us to respond to the depths of the universe if we want to live really fully and vividly. Not very rational, some of that, not very logical, not what we might call logical. So we get those two messages from Sangharakshita, and it might seem that they contradict each other. Think clearly, but also Be open to imagination, feeling, intuition, depth. Surely we either need to do one or the other. We might ask ourselves. Either think logically and clearly or else be open to a vision of the world that goes beyond logic and reason. But actually the truth of the matter is that it's bigger than either of those. The truth of the matter is that it's something that can include those two opposites, actually unite them and include those two opposites. Yes, we need to think clearly, and that involves thinking for ourselves. We need reason, and we need to recognise that reason has its limits. We need reason, or we'll end up believing some stupid things. Look at the internet. If you believe what you see on the internet, well, you could be, well. We need reason. And we need to recognise that reason has its limits. It can only take us so far. Our rational intellect cannot grasp what is beyond our normal experience. And the ultimate nature of reality is beyond our normal experience, at least at the moment. To know the world, we need to do more than to know about the world. We need to know it directly. So we don't know a piece of music with our intellect by knowing the score, by knowing where the key changes happen, by knowing where the oboes come in or whatever, by knowing the date it was written, whatever. We don't know it like that. We know it by immersing ourselves in it, by responding to its beauty, by breaking down the barriers between ourselves and it so that we enter it. That's how we know it. And that must involve appreciating its beauty, opening to its beauty. We know it as much with the heart as we know it with the head. So this thing, the intellect, this thing we call the intellect, which is incredibly valued in our society, what does it actually do? So what it does is it makes symbols. It makes symbols for things in the world. It sort of simplifies the world and makes symbols. So what it does is it sort of makes a diagram of the world, a sort of map of the world, which is quite useful because we need to find our way around. But it's very, very much like a map. A simplified diagram. And of course the map is not the countryside that it maps. The map is just a diagram. Our idea of the world is like a diagram of the world. It's like a map of the world, but it's not the reality. And if we don't see that the map is just a map, really useful for finding our way around, but if we don't see that it is just a map and we think that the map is what there is, then we'll miss the actual experience of the reality that's trying to diagram. So if we go to Paris and we get a map, well, it's really useful to find our way to the Musée Guimet or something. But if we spend our time looking at the map, we haven't experienced Paris. And similarly, if we spend our time in our concepts about reality, we haven't experienced reality. And and the reality is always bigger and more complex and more wonderful than the map. And we need a really good map. We need to think clearly. If we don't have a good map, we might start out for, we might start out for Barcelona and we end up in Barnsley. So we need a good map. We need a good map. But when we get to Barcelona, we need to look at what's there. In fact, all the way, we need to look at the road and we need to look at what's happening, not just at the map. We need to learn to put the map down and open up to the reality that it represents. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this series. And in fact, this series follows really logically from the last one. So we've been looking at the path of the Bodhisattva, the paramitas, the path of self-transcendence. And we looked at the culmination of that, which is the paramita, the practice of wisdom. So we explored the wisdom of the Buddhist tradition, and as part of that exploration, Mokshatara talked about what's called the Heart Sutra. Actually, its name is the Heart of Perfect Wisdom Sutra. And as Mokshatara said then, the Heart Sutra and Heart of Perfect Wisdom is a condensation. It's a condensation of a whole literature, thousands and thousands of pages called the Perfection of Wisdom literature. And what it says, and that's why it's the heart of perfect wisdom, because it sort of condenses that. It almost just points to it. It just expects that you know that tradition. It just points to what it's saying. That's why it's the heart of perfect wisdom. So the Heart Sutra very briefly recaps that. And what it recaps is an argument that within this tradition uses logic and reason to undermine our idea that logic and reason can show us the ultimate truth. What it shows us, what this tradition shows us, is that all our logical concepts and all the words we use to make up our logical concepts, they're artificial. They're not the reality. They're artificial symbols that we've created. They can't actually give us the experience of the reality. They are maps. They are not the reality. In the Zen tradition, they say that the words and ideas are a finger pointing at the moon. And it's a bad mistake to think that they're the moon. So we need a good map, or we set off for Barcelona and end up in Barnsley. We need a finger that actually points at the moon, not at the gutter or down the pub or wherever. But in the end, we need to go beyond the map and look at the territory. We need to go beyond the finger and look at the moon. So this sutra, the Heart of Perfect Wisdom Sutra, having pointed to this whole literature that basically says that all of our concepts and the words that we use to express those concepts are useful but artificial, not actually related to reality. It points to that fact and then says, go beyond it. So the Heart of Perfect Wisdom Sutra ends not with any logical statement, it ends with a mantra. It ends with a mantra. It says, okay, we've done all that. Now here's something that's completely non-logical, non-rational, a mantra. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhi swaha, which we could translate as gone, gone, gone beyond, gone completely beyond, awakening. How wonderful. That is the very essence of the very heart of the perfect wisdom tradition, a mantra that points beyond, And that's what we're going to try and do in this series, without forgetting the need to stay rational and logical, and from clear logical thinking, we're going to explore a bit what that means to go beyond, what points us to the beyond. So to return to the paradox that Sangharakshita offers us, we need to think clearly and logically, and we also need to open up to the mystery that lies beyond the map, opening up to metaphor, magic, and mystery. So I'd like to look at a little bit about what each of those might mean. So metaphor, for a start, metaphor. What do I mean by metaphor? Well, I'd like to define metaphor as the use of something that's in our experience to illustrate something that's not within our experience. So it means using something in our experience that we know about, that we understand, in order to help us to understand something that's not within our experience, that's outside our experience, that we don't know about. So, for example, we could say the spiritual life is like, living the spiritual life effectively is like building a house. First of all, you lay the foundations, then you lay the walls, then you put the roof on. There are things you do first, there are things you do second, there are things you do third. So that's quite useful because we sort of understand you can't put the roof on a house before you put the walls up. And that leads us to understand the fact that there are things that you do in the spiritual life that you need to do first and then you need to build on them. So it's a metaphor. It's something we understand, used to illustrate something we don't. Or that metaphor we always use, the path, okay? So it's a path. The spiritual life is like a path. We've got the threefold path, the eightfold path, the sixfold path of the parameters that we talked about. So we understand paths, don't we? We understand that you have to walk this bit before you get to that bit, and you have to walk that bit before you get to the last bit. You can't walk the last bit before you've done the first bit. It tells us something. It tells us something. We understand paths. It tells us something about the spiritual life. It helps us to understand something we don't actually have the experience of. So really helpful. Metaphors can be really helpful to help us understand things that are beyond our present experience. In fact, they're the only way we have of understanding things that are beyond our present experience. But they never give us the whole picture. They can be really useful, but if we take them literally, they can be disastrously misleading. So, for example, take the metaphor of the path. Well, okay, so it tells us something about the spiritual life, but you tread a path and you stay the same person as you go along it. So you're the same person, you're unchanged at the end to the beginning. Well, that's not like the spiritual life at all, is it? It's not like something I sort of do and stay myself, because I change as I do it. That's the whole point. So taking it literally, the path idea is really quite misleading. So metaphors can be this really helpful way of helping us to understand things that are beyond our present experience. But if we take them literally, we get into trouble, okay? So the Buddha told a really, really interesting and I think important parable about the way we use metaphors to understand reality. That's a reality that's bigger than we can conceive. And this is the parable of the blind men and the elephant. So the parable starts with a king. And to be honest, he doesn't sound like a very nice guy, this king. He sounds a bit nasty. So he gets his minister, and he wants some fun, this king. So he gets this minister, and he says, "Oh, minister, get me 6 blind men. 6 men who have been blind from birth and have never had any experience of an elephant. And get me an elephant." So, minister goes off, gets 6 blind men who've been blind from birth and an elephant. Now he says, I assume he's sort of sitting up on a balcony, sipping something. And the elephant and the blind men are down there in a courtyard. And he says, okay, introduce the blind men to the elephant. Or introduce the elephant to the blind men. So, "Oh, blind men, go and see what an elephant is." So one blind man goes, gets a leg. "Oof, an elephant's a tree. An elephant is a tree." Another one grabs the trunk and says, "Oh, an elephant is a really powerful snake." Another one grabs the tusk and says, "Oh, an elephant's a polished piece of wood." Another one grabs an ear and says, "Oh, I don't know, it's a sheet or a sail." Another one grabs the tail and says, "Oh, it's obviously a bell pull or something." And then the king says, "Okay, get rid of the elephant. Get the blind men together and let them discuss what an elephant is." So, okay, the blind men get together, and one of them says, "Well, it's a tree, isn't it? It's a piece of polished wood." "Don't be daft, it's a sheep thing. There's a bell pull." And after a while of this, they fall out and they start having a fight. So there's 6 blind men in a heap in the dust, all sort of hitting each other. And the king goes, "Ho, ho, ho." The people who compiled the Pali Canon several hundred years after the Buddha's death, they give a really pretty glib description, a glib sort of gloss of what this means. They say, "Oh, it means that other spiritual teachers don't see the whole of reality." But actually, I think the Buddha's getting at something much deeper and more universal than that. what he's saying goes beyond that. So the elephant is reality. The elephant is reality. And the elephant is bigger than anything that the blind men can experience the whole of. They don't have the sensory equipment to perceive the whole of the elephant. And that's just like us. We don't have the equipment to perceive the whole of reality. So what they do is they perceive a part of it. They actually do get some perception of reality. They perceive a part of it. Oh, it's a tree. Oh, it's a piece of polished wood. So what they do is they perceive a part of it and then they make a metaphor. So they relate it to something that's in, they relate what's outside their experience to something that's in their experience. I've come across trees or I've come across pieces of polished wood. It's clear that an elephant is that. So they make a metaphor. That's fine, except they then go on to think that that metaphor is the whole truth. Okay? They take it literally, and that leads to disaster. It leads to conflict and misunderstanding. So I think this says something really important about the way we try to understand a reality that's beyond our experience. We are trapped in time, and we just experience a tiny bit of the world in 3 dimensions. Go outside and look at the sky, we experience a tiny part of the world, a tiny part of the world. And we're trapped in these 3 dimensions, as it were, travelling through time. I don't want to make too much about this, but I gather that physicists tell us the world might have 27 dimensions. I don't know. And there's a physicist friend of mine who says the only thing modern physics tells us about reality is it's weirder than we can imagine. I believe that Einstein proved that time is the 4th dimension. We can't understand a reality that is vast outside of time and beyond the 3 dimensions of our experience. Our intellect only works within the parameters that we experience within 3 dimensions and within the passage of time. We can't figure it out. We're like the blind men. But people can have some direct experience of that higher reality. The blind men, they had some direct experience of that higher reality. Maybe in deep meditation, maybe in peak experiences of various kind, we can experience that bigger reality. The blind men can feel the trunk and the tusks and so on. And they can then go on to try and communicate something about what they've perceived to others. And they do this through metaphor. They should be saying, now the blind man would be fine if what they said is, hey, the elephant is a bit like a tree. It might also be a bit like a polished piece of wood, but it's a bit like a tree. The bit I've felt is a bit like a tree. That would be fine and indeed useful until it gets taken literally, until they stop saying an elephant is like a tree and they start saying an elephant is a tree. I don't know if you get that. If they stop saying it's as if an elephant were a bit like a tree and say an elephant's a tree, you get into all sorts of trouble because elephants aren't trees, actually. And in fact, everything that gets said about a higher or deeper reality that is beyond our experience is a metaphor. So I think the idea of God, for example, the idea of God is a metaphor. In a sense, it's saying, it's as if there was a sort of father in reality. Now maybe if we're lucky, we have experience of a decent ethical father, okay? Maybe we have experience of that. And then it goes on to say, in some ways, it's as if there was a benevolent creative force in the universe that can help us, that's inherently ethical and that can help us, that we can tap into. And that could be very, very useful. But then the idea gets taken completely literally, and we get all the downsides of that metaphor. So fathers can also be really cheesed off. They can be condemnatory. They can demand that you do what they say. They can demand to be obeyed. And then the metaphor turns ugly. And we get crusades. We get inquisitions. We get jihads. So a metaphor which could have been, in one way, if taken as a metaphor, could have been taken quite well, taken quite usefully, become something completely destructive, not good. So that's the first point I'd like to make about our title. We need to remember that when we are talking about the way our intellect grasps spiritual reality, a reality that's deeper, bigger than our experience, we are always talking in metaphors. And we're always talking, and those metaphors are always incomplete. We can't think. We get into real trouble if we think we've bottomed it by thinking in those metaphors. We're always using analogies that are from things that are within our experience. We should never think that grasping those metaphors means we've seen the ultimate truth. We should always recognise, actually, that reality is mysterious. It's more mysterious than we can. It's more mysterious than any of our metaphors about it. And we should be open to the sense of wonder that recognising that mystery gives us. So that brings us to the third word in our title, which is, I'll come back to the second one afterwards, mystery. Okay, so metaphors, magic and mystery. Here's a quote from Albert Einstein. I've got two versions of this quote. I think there might be different translations. One says, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed." And I've got another one which I know where it's from. It's from a book called The World as I See It, where he says something very similar, it might be the same. "The most beautiful and deepest experience a man can have is the sense of the mysterious. It is the underlying principle of all religion, as well as all serious endeavour in art and science. He who never had this experience seems to me, if not dead, then at least blind. The sense that behind anything that can be experienced, there is something that our mind cannot grasp, and whose beauty and sublimity reaches us only indirectly and as a feeble reflection. This is religiousness. In this sense, I am religious. To me, it suffices to wonder at these secrets and to attempt humbly to grasp with my mind a mere image of the lofty structure of all that there is." So that's Albert Einstein. So, the myth in our current society is that we are really clever. Primitive people used to think the world was mysterious, but we're now really clever. We're really clever. We're far too clever for that. We are so clever, we understand the world. It's not at all mysterious. People who think the world is magical and mysterious are primitives. Science has explained things, and we have gone beyond all of that. That would be our rational, limited mind speaking. But I'm going to suggest that in terms of knowledge of science and in terms of reasoning ability, Albert Einstein might have a slight edge on most of us. Agreed? So let's listen to someone who can really reason, really use the rational mind, and see if our own less powerful rational faculty has the humility to listen. So what he says is, if we don't see the mystery that underlies the world, we are blind. We're not seeing reality as it is. And one of the most important things we as Buddhists are seeking to do, is to see reality as it is. Enlightenment's got these many dimensions, but the quality that's emphasised and again is being awake to reality, seeing reality as it is. Not blundering about in a deluded dream as non-awake people do. So, what Albert Einstein is saying is we don't see the mystery that underlies the world, we are blind. We're not seeing things as they are. Seeing things as they are, what we call insight, involves a sense of mystery, involves appreciating mystery. And he goes on to say that behind everything that can be experienced with the physical senses, there are depths that the merely rational mind cannot grasp. And he says that in these depths there is something whose beauty and sublimity, those are his words, reaches us only indirectly. And part of the way that its beauty and sublimity reaches us is through our sense of wonder, our feelings, our intuitive faculty. And he says that all the rational mind can do, if it's going to be in accord with reality, is to humbly realize that it just humbly realize that it just sees a simplified image of the reality. Knowing that we don't know is part of wisdom. So that's what someone who I imagine has got quite a good rational mind says about the limits of the rational mind. And about the need for a sense of mystery and wonder if we want to really see this amazing reality as it is. So we can keep our practice of Buddhism very, very rational. We can really benefit from taking charge of our minds and emotions and being in the gap. We can really benefit from that, being more in the gap. We can benefit from being more ethical. Giving us a positive sense of self-esteem. We can benefit from cultivating positive emotion. We can benefit from focusing our minds in meditation. We can benefit from accepting some obvious dharmic truths, like suffering is inherent in existence. We can't get away from it, but we can face it and rise above it. That all things are impermanent, and that we can change. So these things taken together, all these very rational things, they can create a revolution in our lives. They really can. But they can only go so far. Ultimately, Buddhism is about seeing the nature of reality, and reality is deep. Reality is mysterious. We get so used to thinking it's ordinary, but it ain't. It's deep and it's mysterious. Unless we see that, we're not seeing it. We're not seeing it at all. Just imagine for a minute, so we all think reality is just ordinary. It's a Tuesday, isn't it? It's a fairly ordinary day. Imagining for a moment that all the sort of explanations we had were wiped out, that you suddenly came into this body with no prior sort of assumptions about what the hell was going on, and you suddenly found yourself here. What the dickens? How unlikely it is. Look at these strange people. How very, very unlikely it is. How strange. How very, very mysterious that it's here at all. Let alone that it's so weird. So our usual sort of ideas about things, they just sort of block us from seeing the obvious. And the obvious is that this, whatever it is, and us within it, part of it, is just completely amazing, weird, magical. How did it get here? I don't know. Neither do you. We think science has explained it, but it hasn't. Of course it isn't. So seeing reality for what it is involves recognizing that all the ways we think about reality are just metaphors, and seeing the mystery, seeing the magic. So if we see, say, a wild sunset over a wild mountain scene or over the sea, we don't know that reality. We don't know the reality of that experience by knowing that when it all looks red because of the way the light's refracted by the Earth's atmosphere and the red gets refracted. Somebody who knows more physics than me can tell me about this. The red gets refracted less than the other colours, something like that. And then and the red is of these wavelengths, and those mountains are there because of an ice age that carved them into that. That's not how we know that landscape. That is not how we know that landscape. That's not how we know the reality of that experience. We know it by experiencing it with our whole being, and that includes opening to the wonder of it. We often get that sense of wonder when we're in nature. And it will come along with a sense of joy and an appreciation of beauty and a sense of deep mystery. But if we think we've fully understood it, we've just blotted it out, really, blotted the reality out. So if we want to see the nature of things, exploring this theme, metaphor, magic and mystery, makes perfect sense. It's completely logical, okay? That's what I wanted to get across. If we realise that the way we think about higher reality is all metaphors, and we're open to the mystery, we're open to the fact that it is a mystery, then we're also open to possibilities we could never have imagined that will seem to the rational mind like magic. So, just a few final... Oh my God, what's the time anyway?
It's 20 minutes.
Okay. A few final suggestions. Okay, how do we go about opening up more to mystery? Okay, so a few suggestions. One is get out into nature. Okay. We tend to live as human beings, we live in these concrete boxes which insulate us from reality. They're sort of human-made. And we also live in a whole load of human-made ideas about what we should be doing when we're in those boxes. You go out and spend a night under the stars, and you get quite a different perspective on reality, actually. Spend time in nature. Get out of all the human artificial construction. Spend time alone. That's without your phone or the internet. Spend time alone, just experiencing the world. And even better, do both at the same time. Spend time alone in nature. Reduce input generally. I mean, we're bombarded with this stuff that keeps us stuck in the realm of artificial human concepts. So we can think that that's all it's about, the stuff that bombards our mind. And it's all garbage. We're just pouring garbage into our mind. Meditate. Get beyond the surface level of the mind that's full of that chatter from all that stuff. Get beyond that. And start maybe to see things as they are. And finally, ask the rational mind to sometimes just shut up. Stop censoring my experience. Stop telling me that can't be true. Stop telling me those feelings I have about this or that are just this or just that. Stop thinking you understand it all. Just tell the rational mind to shut up. So sometimes we need it, but sometimes it's a real pain. So those are just a few hints about how we can open up to a sense of the world being what it is, which is mysterious and deep and unfathomable. You know, it's not just this surface reality that we can see and feel and measure. There's something going on here, and it's deeply mysterious. That's my final word.